On a single morning in 1929, the richest nation on earth went broke. Not because of war, not because of famine, not because an enemy crossed a border, but because numbers on a screen stopped adding up. What followed was not just a market crash. It was a global financial war. A war over gold, debt, and survival. A war that quietly rewired the modern world. And this is the part most people were never taught. Because the Great Depression was not simply a failure of markets or human greed. It was a struggle for control over money itself. A war not fought with guns or soldiers, but with interest rates, currencies, and printing presses. And like every war, it produced winners and losers, not by accident, but by design. ACT won. The crack by late 1929, the warning signs were already there. Industrial production was slowing. Farm prices were collapsing. Europe was fragile, drained of gold, and drowning in debt from World War I. But none of that mattered. Optimism had become doctrine. The market always went up. America was unstoppable. Prosperity was permanent. Then came Thursday, October 24th, 1929. Black Thursday. At first, the sell orders came in quietly. A few nervous trades. A tremor, not an earthquake. But within hours, Wall Street descended into chaos. By Tuesday, October 29th, Black Tuesday, billions of dollars in paper wealth had evaporated. Men stood outside the New York Stock Exchange in silence. Not shouting, not panicking, just staring, unable to process how an entire reality had vanished in days. But here is the first uncomfortable truth. The stock market crash did not cause the Great Depression. It only lit the fuse. The catastrophe that followed was built by policy, by decisions made in the name of stability that ended up destroying trust across the world. To understand why, we have to rewind further, back to the illusion that made the crash inevitable. ACT 2, the illusion of prosperity. The 1920s were loud. Jazz spilled from clubs. Automobiles filled the streets. Skyscrapers clawed at the sky. America emerged from World War I not just victorious, but dominant. Europe was shattered. Its gold reserves depleted. Its governments indebted to American banks. The United States became the world's creditor, its factory, and its financial anchor. Wall Street replaced London as the center of global finance. Newspapers called it the Roaring Twenties. But beneath the champagne and optimism, something far more dangerous was forming. Credit was cheap. Speculation was everywhere. And the Federal Reserve, barely a decade old, was quietly fueling the fire. Banks encouraged ordinary people to buy stocks on margin. For every dollar you owned, you could borrow 9 more. Clerks, farmers, factory workers, everyone believed the same thing. The market was a machine that only moved upward. The Dow Jones soared. Headlines celebrated progress. But prosperity built on debt is not prosperity. It is leverage, and leverage always snaps. ACT 3, when the money war began after the crash, the United States faced a decision that would define the next decade. The Federal Reserve had 2 options. It could flood the system with money, or it could tighten credit to defend the dollar. It chose discipline. At the time, this decision seemed responsible. The world was still tied to the gold standard. Every dollar in circulation was supposed to be backed by gold. The Fed feared that if it printed too much, foreign nations would lose confidence and demand gold in exchange for dollars. So instead of easing, it tightened. Interest rates rose. Liquidity vanished. Banks began to fail. Between 1930 and 1933, nearly 10,000 American banks collapsed. People lined up outside branches, desperate to withdraw their savings, only to find locked doors and empty vaults. What began as a market crash became something far worse. A monetary collapse. And it wasn't confined to America. It was spreading. Act 4, the gold trap. The gold standard had once been the pride of civilization. Fixed currencies, hard discipline, trust enforced by metal. But in the 1930s, gold became a trap. Under the rules of gold, if money left your country, you had only one response. Raise interest rates, cut government spending, reduce wages. This was called deflation. In reality, it was economic suicide. Britain saw unemployment surge past 20%. Germany was crushed by misery and resentment. America shut down factories while gold sat untouched in vaults. The gold standard was supposed to create order. Instead, it synchronized disaster. Every nation was chained to the same sinking ship. and the first to understand this would break the rules and survive. ACT 5. Britain breaks first in 1931. Investors began draining gold from the Bank of England. The pound was under attack. Confidence was collapsing. The British government tried everything. Spending cuts, wage reductions, austerity. Nothing worked. Finally, in September 1931, Britain did the unthinkable. It abandoned gold. Overnight, the pound fell by 30%. The world was stunned. For a century, the British pound had been as good as gold. Now it wasn't. But something unexpected happened next. Exports rose. Credit loosened. Production slowly recovered. Britain had chosen inflation over deflation, and it lived. The lesson was unmistakable. But the most powerful nation on earth was not ready to accept it. While Britain let go, America held on. Across the Atlantic, the United States treated gold not as a policy tool, but as a moral principle. President Herbert Hoover insisted that sound money was sacred. To abandon gold, he believed, would be to abandon discipline, responsibility, and trust itself. So the United States chose deflation, and the cost was devastating. Prices fell by nearly 1/3. Wages collapsed. Debt became heavier with every passing month. Farmers watched crop prices fall so low that it cost more to transport food than it was worth. Milk was poured into ditches. Wheat was burned as fuel, not because food was unnecessary, but because money was broken. Unemployment exploded. Nearly 1 in 4 Americans was out of work. Breadlines stretched through cities that had celebrated prosperity just years earlier. Shantytowns, called Hoovervilles, rose on the edges of wealth. The dollar was strong. The people were starving. This was the paradox of the gold standard. It preserved the value of money by destroying the value of life built around it. And it could not last. ACT 6. Roosevelt's monetary revolution in 1933. Franklin Delano Roosevelt took office amid total collapse. Banks were failing daily. Confidence was gone. The financial system was frozen. His first move was not about jobs. It was about money. Roosevelt declared a nationwide bank holiday. Every bank in the country was shut down. The financial system stopped completely. Then came the most radical monetary action in American history. Executive Order 6102. Private ownership of gold was outlawed. Americans were ordered to surrender gold coins, bullion, and certificates to the government. In exchange, they received paper dollars at a fixed price, $20.67 per ounce. Most complied. Months later, the government revalued gold to $35 per ounce. Overnight, the dollar was devalued by 40%. The result? The largest wealth transfer in U.S. history. From citizens to the state, carried out in the name of recovery. Inflation had returned, not as chaos, but as policy. ACT 7. The currency wars. Once America devalued, the rules changed for everyone. The 1930s became a global currency war. Nation after nation cheapened its money to survive. The dollar fell, then the franc, then the lira, then the yen. Tariffs rose. Trade collapsed. Global cooperation evaporated. Economists later called this competitive devaluation. In reality, it was economic warfare. Each country tried to export its pain to others. Each tried to preserve jobs at home by making exports cheaper abroad. The world fractured into rival currency blocks. Sterling, dollar, yen, gold. Globalization reversed, and the damage spread far beyond finance. ACT 8. When money breaks politics, economic collapse does not stay economic. In Germany, 6 million were unemployed. The middle class, already destroyed by hyperinflation in the 1920s, was now crushed by deflation. Savings gone, status erased, faith shattered. They turned to someone who promised revenge, order, and revival. Adolf Hitler. In Japan, military leaders argued that conquest was the only path to survival. In Italy, Mussolini glorified state control. In the Soviet Union, Stalin used the chaos to tighten his grip. In the United States, Roosevelt expanded federal power more than any president before him. Different ideologies. Same root cause. Monetary failure. The Great Depression was not just an economic collapse. It was a global reshuffling of power. ACT 9. Recovery and a new empire. By the late 1930s, recovery appeared, but it was not natural. Governments had taken command. In America, the New Deal rebuilt infrastructure, created jobs, and restored confidence, but it also permanently expanded the role of the state in the economy. Then came rearmament. World War II did what policy alone could not. It mobilized production, absorbed unemployment, and justified unlimited spending. When the war ended, the world's monetary map was unrecognizable. Gold was concentrated in Fort Knox. Europe was devastated. The British Empire was financially exhausted. In 1944, nations gathered at Bretton Woods. A new system was born, currencies pegged to the dollar pegged to gold. The United States became the world's banker. The Great Depression had buried the old empire of British gold and crowned a new empire of American credit. ACT 10, the lesson most people miss. Most people remember the Great Depression as a tragedy. But it was also a takeover. The gold standard did not die because it failed economically. It died because it restricted political power. Defending gold meant austerity and unrest. Abandoning it meant inflation and control. Either way, citizens paid. Every rescue concentrated power upward, from savers to states, from markets to managers. The Depression wasn't the end of capitalism. It was its transformation, from a system backed by gold to one backed by promises. ACT 11, the modern echo. If this sounds distant, look again. In 2008, banks failed and credit froze. Central banks printed trillions. Deflation was avoided, but power concentrated. In 2020, governments printed without restraint. Debt exploded. Inflation returned. Different decades. Same rhythm. The Great Depression was the first global financial war. Every crisis since has been another campaign in that same conflict. A war over trust, over control, over the value of everything you own. And it never really ended. What history books often miss is this simple truth. The Great Depression did not end in 1939. It only changed shape. The battlefield moved. The weapons evolved. But the conflict itself continued. Because the Depression was never just about unemployment or stock prices. It was about who controls money when trust collapses. ACT 12. Money as a weapon under the gold standard. Money enforced discipline. Governments could not spend freely. Debt had limits. Promises had consequences. That discipline came at a brutal cost. Deflation meant falling wages, mass unemployment, and social collapse. Entire populations were sacrificed to preserve the value of currency. Under fiat money, the weapon changed. Now money enforces control. Instead of deflation, governments choose inflation. Instead of collapse, they choose rescue. Instead of failure, they choose intervention. The pain does not disappear. It is redistributed. Quietly, gradually, upward. This was the real lesson governments learned from the 1930s. Not how to prevent crises, but how to survive them. ACT 13. The price of stability. Every time you hear phrases like defending the currency, stimulating the economy, or maintaining financial stability, remember what those words meant in the past. In the 1930s, defending the currency meant starvation through deflation. Today, stimulating the economy means erosion through inflation. Different strategy. Same result. Governments endure. Banks adapt. Elites reposition. Ordinary people absorb the cost. This is why every major crisis ends the same way. More centralization, more bureaucracy, more power concentrated at the top. The Great Depression institutionalized this model, and every crisis since has reinforced it. ACT 14. The echoes through time. Look at the pattern. The 1970s, debt, inflation, and monetary chaos. 2008, leverage, collapse, and massive bailouts. 2020, total shutdown, unlimited printing, and inflation's return. Each crisis follows the same rhythm. Excess, collapse, rescue, consolidation. Each time, trust weakens. Each time, money becomes more abstract. Each time, control tightens. The Depression was not a historical anomaly. It was a blueprint. ACT 15. What it means for you. This is not about predicting doom. It is about understanding the terrain. When you hear debates about interest rates, central banks, or debt ceilings, you are not watching technical discussions. You are watching the continuation of a war that began in the 1930s. A war over who absorbs losses when systems fail. Will it be savers or borrowers? Citizens or states? Markets or managers? History already hints at the answer. The final warning: every era believes its system is different, smarter, more advanced. more controlled. Every era learns the same lesson. It isn't. Money is not neutral. It never was. Under gold, it punished weakness. Under fiat, it rewards proximity to power. When trust breaks, money becomes a weapon, turned inward. The Great Depression was the first global financial war. Every crisis since has been another chapter, and the war is still being fought, not in trenches, not on beaches, but in central bank vaults, in government debt offices, in the quiet decisions that determine what your money is worth tomorrow. So the next time markets shake, don't just watch the numbers. Ask the deeper question: who is gaining control, and who is paying for it? If this gave you a new perspective, subscribe, because the most important truths about the present are never hidden in the future. They are written again and again in the past.